The gray Bristol dawn was still deciding whether to become morning when Helena Crane stood at the rail of a departing ship, her son's hand wrapped inside hers, and watched the dock begin to shrink. Tobias was 7, and he pressed against her side with the particular warmth of a child who does not yet understand that warmth can be a strategy. He was simply cold, and she was his mother, and that was enough. Helena was not cold. She had not been cold in 2 days. She had been moving, steadily and without hesitation, through a series of tasks that required her full attention, and the movement had kept her from feeling anything she could not afford to feel. The ship creaked beneath her feet, and the water between hull and dock widened by inches, then by yards, and the fog rolled across the Bristol Avon in long gray ribbons that muffled the sounds of the harbor, the ropes, the gulls, the shouts of the dockhands, until all of it seemed to be happening at a careful remove in some other city to some other woman's life. Then she saw the horse. It came along the quay at a pace that was past urgency, and into something rawer than that, a man who had ridden through the night and arrived at the wrong side of a fact he could not change. Julian Crane reined in at the very edge of the dock, where the cobblestones gave way to water, and his horse threw its head and blew steam into the cold air. He had no hat. His coat was dark with road dust and what might have been rain from the earlier hours, and he sat very still on the horse in the way that he always went still when something had gone irreversibly wrong. Not the stillness of a man accepting defeat, but of a man calculating and finding no calculation left to make. He looked at her. She looked at him. The gangway was already pulled. There was no gesture she could make that would have meant anything useful. And Helena had not, in 2 days, made a single gesture that was not useful. She did not raise her hand. She did not look away with the theatrical dignity of a woman performing her own departure. She simply looked at her husband across the widening water, and then she turned. Gently, the way you turn a child who is about to see something you would rather he did not see, and placed her hand on Tobias's shoulder and directed him toward the open sea. Tobias looked up at her. "Is that father?" "Yes," Helena said. "Is he waving?" She did not look back. "No," she said. "He is not." The gray strip of water between them widened until Julian's figure was a dark shape against the pale dock. And then the fog took him, and the dock, and Bristol, and everything that had constituted her life for the past 8 years. 2 days earlier, Helena had been sitting at Julian's travel desk in the study of their London townhouse, looking for the ink she knew he kept in the right-hand drawer, when she found the letters. There were 4 of them, folded and tied with ordinary cord, written in Julian's hand, that careful, spare hand she knew as well as her own, and addressed to someone called Margaret. She had not intended to read them. She sat with them in her hands for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually do, and then she read the first one through, and then the second, and then she set all 4 down on the desk and sat very still, looking at the wall. The letters were intimate, not in the way of a man conducting an open correspondence, but in the way of a man writing to someone whose existence he was managing with considerable care. References to arrangements, to money conveyed through a third party, to a woman who was frightened of someone whose name was only ever abbreviated to D, and to Julian's repeated assurances that he was handling the matter. There was tenderness in the letters. There was also secrecy, the kind that had been maintained for some time, and there were 3 years' worth of absences that now arranged themselves into a pattern Helena had spent those same 3 years refusing to name. She read all 4 letters a second time. Then she folded them and set them down again. She did not cry. She had known, in the abstract way that intelligent women who are being deceived know things, that something was wrong. She had built the case brick by brick over 3 years, the weeks away, the accounts she was not shown, the quality of Julian's attention when he was present, which was the attention of a man thinking about something else. She had told herself a series of increasingly unconvincing stories about his father's estate business, about the pressures of inherited debt, about the way some men simply withdrew into themselves, and it did not mean what it appeared to mean. The letters were the final brick. The structure was complete. She looked at it and found it exactly as ugly as she had feared. She went to her writing desk and spent the next 3 hours with a trusted copying clerk she had used for her own correspondence, a woman named Mrs. Farrow, discreet and fast, who asked no questions and made 2 clean copies of all 4 letters without once changing her expression. Helena paid her generously and sent her home. By 4 in the afternoon, the copies were on their way to London by express rider, addressed to Sir Aldous Penhallow at his house in Grosvenor Street, with a note in Helena's hand that said only, "You will understand when you have read them. Do not act until you have heard from me." She knew, as she sealed the envelope, that her father would act immediately. She knew it with the same certainty with which she knew everything about Sir Aldous, his devotion to her, his implacability, his complete inability to receive an insult to his family and sit quietly with it. She sent the copies anyway. By 5, she had booked 2 passages on the morning tide, herself and Tobias, on a ship bound for the Portuguese coast, where her mother's villa sat empty above a small harbor town, waiting to be claimed by someone who needed it. She packed 1 trunk. She chose with precision the things that were hers by nature and not by marriage. Tobias's things took the longer time. He was 7 and owned a great deal of beloved rubbish. And Helena permitted herself to pack 3 items that were not strictly necessary, because they were his favorites and she was his mother. And some decisions had nothing to do with strategy. She left her wedding ring in a sealed envelope on Julian's pillow. She did not write anything inside the envelope. The ring said everything the envelope needed to say. Julian returned to the house at 9:30 that evening. By then Helena and Tobias were already in lodgings near the docks, and the ship departed with the morning tide. And the rest is the scene already described. The rail, the fog, the horse, the widening water. We do not yet know, and Helena at the rail does not fully know either, exactly what was in those letters. We know what she read. We know what she concluded. But the thing about conclusions built on evidence is that they are only as reliable as the reading. And Helena, for all her precision, had read those letters alone, at a desk, in a house where she had been quietly furious for 3 years. The villa stood above the harbor town on a low hill, its white walls absorbing the Portuguese light in a way that London stone never did. Helena's mother had spent her last years there, choosing warmth over propriety, and the house had the quality of a place that had been lived in by someone who made her own rules. There were orange trees in the courtyard. The harbor was visible from every south-facing window, a blue bowl of water with fishing boats and the occasional merchant vessel coming in on the tide. Tobias, who had been subdued on the crossing, became himself again within 48 hours. He found the harbor market on the 2nd morning and came back with a small crab in a bucket and an extensive account of a fisherman named Sebastião, who had shown him how to bait a line. Helena listened to all of it over breakfast and felt something shift in the vicinity of her sternum. Not quite relief, but the first intimation that relief was possible. Then the letters from England arrived. Sir Aldous had not waited. Of course he had not waited. She had known he would not wait. And she had sent the copies regardless, and that was a fact she would need to live with. Her father's first letter arrived 9 days after her departure, and was written in the particular register he reserved for situations in which he had already acted, and was now informing her of what he had done. He had presented the copies to his solicitors. He had begun calling in 3 of Julian's outstanding debts. Not quietly, but with the deliberate visibility of a man who wanted the financial community of London to understand what was happening and why. He had spoken, at his club and at 2 dinners, about the conduct of his son-in-law. The word dishonor appeared in the letter 4 times. Helena sat with her father's letter at the breakfast table after Tobias had gone out, and she read it through twice, and then she wrote back asking him to stop. She chose her words with care. She told him she needed time to establish the facts before any further action was taken. She told him that the letters were suggestive but not conclusive, and that she had not yet had the conversation with Julian that would determine the truth of the matter. Her father wrote back by return rider. His reply was 8 lines long. He told her she was a sensible woman in ordinary circumstances, but that she was too close to the situation to see it clearly. He told her that a man who wrote such letters to a woman was a man who had forfeited the benefit of the doubt. He told her that the debts were already called, and that 2 of them could not now be withdrawn without making Sir Aldous himself look foolish, which was not a thing he intended to do. He told her she should rest and let him handle the London end of affairs. Helena set the letter down and looked out at the harbor for a long time. The machine she had set in motion when she sent those copies was turning now without her hand on it, and it was turning in the direction of a man's ruin, and she could not reach it to slow it down. She had handed Sir Aldous a weapon and asked him not to aim it, and she had known, at the moment of handing it over, that he would aim it immediately and with great satisfaction. She had done it anyway. That was the thing she could not now unknow about herself. 6 weeks after her arrival, a small boat came in on the afternoon tide, carrying 1 passenger who had not been expected. Helena was on the terrace when she saw him come up through the harbor town. Julian, moving through the narrow street below with the particular, unhurried pace of a man who has crossed a sea and arrived where he intended to be, and is now simply completing the final distance. He looked older than she remembered. He had not had an easy 6 weeks. She was standing when he came through the gate at the foot of the terrace steps, and she did not move to meet him or to invite him inside. She stood at the top of the steps with her hands at her sides and waited. Julian stopped at the base of the steps and looked up at her. He had brought nothing, no documents, no solicitor's letter, no prepared speech visible in his posture. He simply stood there in the afternoon light and said, "Helena." "Lord Avonmore?" she said. She used his title deliberately, and he heard the deliberateness and accepted it. "I would like to speak with you," Julian said. "You may speak with me here," Helena said. "Tobias is inside with his books. He will stay there." Julian came up 2 steps, which brought him level with her gaze, and stopped. He looked at her face for a moment, reading it the way he had always read her, quietly and without making it obvious. And then he said, "Ask me whatever you need to ask." "I have 3 questions," Helena said. "I would like you to answer them in order." He gave a single nod. "Yes." "Did you write those letters?" "Yes," Julian said. "Every word." "Do you keep a woman?" Something moved across Julian's face. Not guilt, but something more complicated than that. Something that looked like a man trying to explain a truth that he knows will sound like a lie. "The woman in those letters," he said carefully, "is my sister." "Your sister?" Helena said. She did not move. "You have no sister." "I have a half-sister," Julian said. "My father's daughter. She is illegitimate and has never been publicly acknowledged. Her name is Margaret. She has been in a situation of considerable danger for 3 years, and I have been attempting to address that danger without exposing her or destroying what little protection her anonymity affords her." Helena looked at him for a long time. She was aware, with the part of her mind that remained analytical even in moments of significant emotional pressure, that what he was saying was internally consistent, that it accounted for the letters, for the secrecy, for the references to money and fear and the abbreviated name of someone threatening. She was also aware that this was precisely the story a man would construct if he had been caught in an affair and needed a narrative that could not be immediately disproved. "Can you produce her?" Helena asked. "Not safely," Julian said. "Not yet. The man who threatens her, his name is Drew. He was my father's solicitor. He watches her movements. If I produce her publicly, I expose her." "Can you produce a document? A record of your father's, a baptismal entry, a letter acknowledging her existence?" "My father left nothing in writing," Julian said. "He confessed it to me at his deathbed and asked me to protect her. There is no document I can show you that does not require Margaret herself to verify it." "Then you have answered my first question and my third," Helena said. "And your answer to the second is a claim without evidence and without a witness. Which sounds, I want you to understand that I am saying this without pleasure, exactly as a guilty man's defense would sound." Julian was quiet for a moment. A gull called somewhere below the terrace, and the sound of the harbor market drifted up on the warm air, and neither of them moved. "I know," Julian said. "I know how it sounds." "Then you understand why I cannot simply accept it." He met her eyes steadily. "Yes," he said, "I understand." He left the terrace shortly after. Helena remained where she was, holding in her mind two possibilities of equal weight: that she had sent the instrument of a man's ruin to her father, based on a misreading, and that the misreading, even if it proved real, did not alter the underlying truth that Julian had managed her silence for 3 years, had chosen his secret over her understanding, and had left her to construct a false account of her own marriage without once offering her the truth to build on. Both things could be real at once. She stood there with them until the sun moved behind the hill and the terrace went into shadow. Julian did not sail home. She discovered this 3 days later, when Tobias came in from the harbor with the information that father was staying at the inn by the port and had been there since Tuesday and had a room overlooking the water. Tobias delivered this report with the careful neutrality of a 7-year-old who has correctly identified that the adults in his life are navigating something he is not yet supposed to ask about directly. "Did you speak to him?" Helena asked. "He was sitting outside," Tobias said. He waved. I waved back. "Was that all right?" "Yes," Helena said. "That was all right." On the 4th day after Julian's arrival, the weather broke. A harbor rainstorm came in from the south in the late afternoon. The sudden, warm kind that turned the harbor steps into small waterfalls and drove the market vendors under their awnings in a matter of minutes. Helena was on the upper floor of the villa when she looked down and saw Julian standing against the wall of the malecon below, his coat dark with rain, not sheltering, simply waiting in the way that he waited for things. She did not go down. She stood at the window for a moment, and then she went to the chest in the dressing room and took out the coat. Julian's coat, the good wool one he had left in London, which she had folded into the bottom of her trunk at the last moment, and had not, in the 6 weeks since, been able to explain to herself satisfactorily. She took it downstairs to where Tobias was sitting with his book. "Take this to your father," she said, holding the coat out. "He is at the malecon wall. He is wet." Tobias looked at the coat and then at his mother with the expression of a child processing information that seems significant. He took the coat without comment and went out into the rain at a run, his small boots splashing on the courtyard stones. From the window, Helena watched him reach Julian and hold the coat up with both arms. She watched Julian take it from those small hands and shake it out and put it on, and then look up at the villa window. He could see her there. She did not move away from the glass. That evening, coming down from the harbor market with a basket of bread and 2 bunches of dried herbs, Helena misjudged the 3rd step from the bottom. the one that was always slick after rain, which she had already learned once and apparently not retained. Her foot went sideways, and Julian's hand closed around her wrist before she had fully understood that she was falling. She caught herself against him, her free hand gripping his forearm, and then she was upright and stable, and he was still holding her wrist. Her hand closed over his. 1 moment longer than necessary. Then she stepped back and straightened and picked up the basket from where it had landed on the step. "Thank you," she said. "The third step," Julian said. "It's always the third." "I know," Helena said. "I knew that." He almost smiled. She turned and went up the steps, and neither of them said anything else. And Julian walked back toward the Port Inn, and she did not watch him go. Margaret arrived at the villa gate at nightfall on a Thursday, 3 weeks after Julian's first crossing. She was perhaps 30, with the look of someone who had been frightened for long enough that the fear had settled into her posture and become a kind of permanent readiness. She asked for Lady Avonmore by name and said that she had come from England and that she was sorry for the hour and that she needed to speak about Mr. Drew. Helena brought her inside and gave her tea and sat across from her in the lamp-lit sitting room and listened. In 1 hour, she had the complete truth. Margaret Crane, the name she had never been permitted to use publicly, was the natural daughter of the late Lord Avonmore's prolonged relationship with a woman in Wiltshire. Julian had learned of her existence at his father's deathbed. The man called Drew had been the family solicitor for 20 years, and had known about Margaret for 15 of them, and had used that knowledge to extract money and favors from the late lord, and then, after his death, from Julian directly. The letters, all 4 of them, were Julian's correspondence with his half-sister about Drew's escalating demands, about the arrangements Julian had made to keep her safe and housed and beyond Drew's direct reach. Sir Aldous' public campaign against Julian had changed Drew's calculations entirely. With Julian publicly discredited and financially weakened, Drew had concluded that the protection Margaret had been receiving would now collapse. He had stopped asking Julian for money and had gone directly to Margaret with a new demand, a sum considerably larger than anything he had previously required, backed by the threat of publishing her identity and her illegitimacy in the most damaging terms he could arrange. Margaret was frightened and had nowhere else to go. She had come to Helena because Julian had told her in his last letter that his wife was here, that Helena was the most capable person he knew, and that if things became dangerous, she should go to the villa. Helena sat with this for a long time after Margaret had finished speaking. The lamp burned steadily between them. Outside, the harbor was quiet, and the night was warm, and the world continued to operate according to its ordinary rules, indifferent to the fact that Helena's understanding of the last 3 years had just been turned entirely inside out. "He told you to come to me," Helena said. "He said you would know what to do," Margaret said. "He said you always knew what to do." Helena looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about 4 letters she had read alone at a desk in London, and the conclusions she had drawn from them, and the copies she had sent to her father, and the campaign that was now stripping Julian's name from London society brick by brick. She thought about Sir Aldous' letter. Too far committed, too satisfied by the campaign to reverse course. And about the machine that was still turning without her hand on it. In 2 hours, she understood the full shape of what she had done. She had read a correspondence between a man and his frightened half-sister, and concluded it was an affair. She had sent copies of that correspondence to the one man in England most capable of causing maximum damage with them. She had done so swiftly and cleanly, without asking a single question, because asking would have required her to sit with uncertainty, and certainty, even terrible certainty, was cleaner than that. Margaret was in the guest room by midnight. Helena did not sleep. Before dawn, she went down to the Malecon with a shawl around her shoulders and found Julian there. A storm had closed the port road the previous evening, and he had not been able to return to the inn, and he had spent the night on a bench outside the harbor chapel rather than come to the villa uninvited. He looked up when he heard her steps on the stone. They stood side by side at the Malecon wall and looked at the black water. The harbor was very quiet. Above them the sky was the deep blue-gray of the hour before the first light, and the fishing boats knocked softly against their moorings. And the only sound was the water and the occasional creak of rope. Helena did not look at him. She stood with her hands on the cold stone of the wall, and after a long time she said, "I no longer know who I was protecting when I sent those letters." Julian said nothing. He stayed where he was, his shoulder 6 inches from hers, and the silence held between them. Not the silence of a man who had nothing to say, but of a man who understood that she was not asking him to answer. The dawn came in slowly, the way it does over water, the black becoming gray, and then the gray becoming the first pale suggestion of color at the edge of the sea. They were still there when the sun cleared the horizon. Helena wrote to her father that same morning. She wrote 3 pages in the clearest prose she could manage, setting out Margaret's identity, Drew's history, the nature of the letters, and the full correction of everything she had sent him 6 weeks earlier. She wrote, "I was wrong in my reading, and I was wrong not to ask before I acted. And I am asking you now to stop the campaign and settle the debts without further damage to Lord Avonmore's name." Sir Aldis's reply arrived 12 days later. He did not believe her. His letter was not unkind. He loved her, and his love was visible even through his refusal. But he was too committed and too certain. And he wrote that Helena was a woman who had been through a great shock and was now being worked upon by a man who had every reason to construct a convincing story. He wrote that Margaret sounded like an invention. He wrote that he would continue as he had begun. Helena read the letter at the breakfast table and set it down and went to find Julian at the Port Inn. "He won't stop," she said, sitting across from him in the small room he had taken overlooking the harbor. "He thinks I'm being manipulated." "I know," Julian said. "I received his solicitor's 3rd letter yesterday." "What does it say?" "That 2 more debts will be called by the end of the month," Julian said, "and that if I attempt to contest the account of events currently circulating in London, he will ensure the version becomes considerably more detailed." Helena looked at him. "Helena, how much damage can he do?" "Enough," Julian said simply. "The title survives. The finances, possibly not." 3 days after that, Drew himself arrived in the harbor town. Helena learned of his presence from the innkeeper's wife, who mentioned a well-dressed English gentleman asking after the villa on the hill. He came to the gate that afternoon and presented himself as a man of business with a communication for Lady Avonmore. Helena received him in the courtyard, standing with the gate still between them. Drew was a compact man in his 50s, with the careful grooming of someone who understood that appearance was a form of argument. He spoke pleasantly. He said that he was sorry for the inconvenience of the crossing, but that matters had become somewhat complex, and he felt a direct conversation was warranted. He said that he was aware Helena had recently written to her father with a revised account of events. He said that he had in his possession a number of documents, letters, accounts, certain communications between Lady Avonmore and her father, that, read in a particular light, could be presented as evidence that the Countess had fabricated the romance herself in order to extract a financial settlement from Sir Aldis Penhallow. "The version I could publish," Drew said, "would make you the architect of your husband's ruin. Not a wronged wife, but a calculating daughter using her father's money and her father's influence to punish a man she simply wished to be rid of. Helena looked at him for a long time. She felt the ground shift, not in panic, but with the particular recognition of someone who has just seen the full board for the first time. She had been the instrument of justice. Now she was the instrument's liability. "You will hear from Lord Avonmore," she said. "Good afternoon, Mr. Drew." She closed the gate. Julian came to the villa that evening, the first time she had permitted him inside. She met him in the sitting room and told him everything Drew had said, and Julian listened without interrupting, sitting forward in the chair with his hands clasped, and when she had finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I am going to write to your father." "He won't believe a letter from you," Helena said. "I am not going to argue with him," Julian said. "I am going to confess to him." She looked at him steadily, waiting. "The full account," Julian said. "My father's adultery, Margaret's parentage, the history of the blackmail from the beginning. Everything I protected for 3 years. I will sign it and send it to Sir Aldous directly, and he can do with it whatever he chooses. He can publish it, he can use it, he can laugh at it. But once it is in his hands, Drew has nothing left to threaten with, because the secret is already out." "Julian," Helena said, "that destroys the thing you spent 3 years protecting." "I know," Julian said. "Margaret knows the risk. I spoke to her this afternoon. She said," he stopped. He picked up a word and set it down again. "She said she would rather be known as herself than protected as a secret." Tobias appeared in the doorway to the sitting room in his nightclothes, on the transparent pretense of needing a glass of water that was available in his room. He looked at his father, sitting in the chair across from his mother, and then looked at Helena with the particular expression of a child assembling evidence. "Mama," Tobias said, "why does father look at you like that?" Helena opened her mouth and closed it again. Julian looked at the floor. Tobias waited with the infinite patience of a 7-year-old who has identified a significant question. "Go to bed," Helena said. "I will come and say good night." Tobias went. Helena stood at the window for a long time after he had gone, her back to the room, looking out at the harbor lights reflected in the dark water. Behind her, Julian did not move or speak. After a while, she said, "Send the letter." Late summer came to the villa terrace with the particular quality of a season that knows it is ending. The light going amber earlier, the evenings cooler, the orange trees in the courtyard beginning to turn. Julian made his 3rd crossing in September. He came without announcement, and Helena did not send him away. She found him on the terrace steps in the early evening and brought him inside for the first time, as a matter of course, without ceremony, as though the threshold were simply a threshold, and not the line she had been holding for 3 months. She brought wine and set it on the table between them and sat down. And Julian sat across from her, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "I am not here to ask you anything," Julian said at last. "I came to tell you things I should have told you 3 years ago." "All right," Helena said. He told her everything. His father's deathbed, the confession that had arrived without warning, the existence of Margaret, the name of Drew, and the shape of the leverage Drew held. The choice Julian had faced in the weeks after his father's death. Expose the family's most damaging secret to the one man, Sir Aldous, most capable of weaponizing it, or carry the secret alone and protect Margaret in silence while his marriage quietly died of inattention. He told her about the weekly decisions, the money moved through intermediaries, the letters written and burned and rewritten, the absences he had not been able to explain. He told her about watching Helena build her careful, competent life around the edges of a marriage he was failing to inhabit. And about the precise moment, not one moment but dozens of them, accumulated. When he understood that she had stopped expecting anything from him and had organized herself accordingly, and about how he had told himself that her competence was a kind of strength and not a kind of grief. "I did not ask you to carry it with me," Julian said. "I told myself it was protection. Every week I told myself that. And every week it was also the easier choice, because telling you the truth would have required me to trust you with something that could destroy us both, and I was not certain you would choose to hold it." Helena looked at him across the table. The lamp between them was low, and the night air came in through the open terrace door, and somewhere below them the harbor was going about its quiet business. "You were not certain I would choose to hold it," she said. "No," Julian said. "I was not." "That is the actual betrayal," Helena said. "Not the letters, not the absences. That." His voice was quiet. "Yes," he said. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need to tell you something as well." Julian waited. "When I found those letters," Helena said, "I did not ask you what they meant. I did not come to you that evening and say, 'Julian, I found these. Tell me what they are.' I read them alone. And I decided alone. And I acted before you knew anything had changed. I told myself it was because I was certain. I told myself the evidence was clear." She stopped. She looked at the wine glass and not at him. "It was not because I was certain. It was because asking you would have required me to sit with the possibility that I was wrong, or that the truth was more complicated than what I had decided. And I did not want to do that. I wanted the clarity of being right. I wanted the action to be clean." Julian did not speak. "I sent those letters to my father," Helena said, "and I knew what he would do with them. And I sent them anyway. And Margaret spent 3 months more frightened than she needed to be, because I preferred the precision of my own conclusion to the discomfort of a question." She looked up at him. "You kept a secret to protect her. I launched a campaign that put her in greater danger. I am not only the injured party in this." The quiet between them had a different quality now. Not the silence of two people in opposition, but of two people who have arrived, from opposite directions, at the same difficult piece of ground. "What do you need?" Julian asked. 3 things, Helena said. Margaret legally recognized, properly with documents filed, her name and her parentage established on record where Drew cannot threaten her with it any longer. Drew confronted and finished, not managed, not paid, finished. And my father. She paused. I need to stand in front of my father and tell him, with my own mouth, that I was wrong in what I sent him, and wrong in how I sent it. Not a letter he can dismiss. Me, in the room. "All 3, Julian said, without qualification. "I know," Helena said. "I know you will." The first light was still an hour away, but the darkness had thinned to the particular blue of the hour before dawn, and the harbor below was beginning to wake. A lantern moving on one of the fishing boats, the first distant sound of the market setting up. Helena looked at Julian across the table and thought about 8 years, and the 2 that had almost been something, and the 6 that had been the slow management of an absence. She thought about the rail of a departing ship and a gray strip of water widening. She thought about a coat in the bottom of a trunk that she had carried across a sea without explaining to herself why. She said, "The hardest thing I admitted to myself. That night on the Malecon. The night Margaret arrived." She stopped and started again. "I admitted that I was relieved when I found those letters, not only furious. Relieved, because it gave me a reason that was clean and external and required nothing of me except action. It meant I did not have to ask why I had been quietly leaving the marriage for 2 years before I ever found them." Julian looked at her. He did not look away. "I was leaving too," he said, just more slowly, and in the wrong direction. Helena stood up. She came around the table to where he sat, and she took his face in her hands, and she kissed him. Once, slowly, with the full weight of everything that had been said, and everything that had been carried, and everything that was not yet resolved, but was at least, finally, real. When she stepped back, neither of them spoke. Neither of them called it a reconciliation, because it was not a reconciliation. It was a beginning, which is harder and costs more and lasts longer. The legal recognition of Margaret Crane was drawn up in October, witnessed by 2 solicitors and filed in the appropriate registry. A document that stated her parentage plainly and established her identity in terms that Drew could not threaten to reveal because the document itself had already revealed everything. It was, as Julian had said, the removal of the instrument. Drew had held Margaret's secret as leverage. The document made the secret public property and the leverage disappeared. Drew made one final approach. He arrived at the Port Inn and sent a note to the villa requesting a meeting with Lord Avonmore. And Julian met him in the inn's small front room with his solicitor beside him and a copy of the filed recognition on the table. The conversation was brief. Drew looked at the document and at the solicitor and at Julian's face, and he understood that he had nothing left to threaten with. He left the harbor town the following day and did not return. Sir Aldous came in November. He did not come willingly. He came because Helena had written to him a letter that was not an argument, and because Julian had sent him the signed account of the full history, and because Helena had followed both with a second letter that said simply, "Come and meet your grandson properly. He has been asking about you. He would like to show you the harbor." Sir Aldous arrived at the villa on a gray afternoon with the bearing of a man who has been wrong about something significant and has not yet decided how to carry that fact. Helena met him at the gate, and they stood together for a moment, father and daughter. And then she said, "I was wrong, Papa. I should have asked first. I should have asked before I sent you anything." Sir Aldous looked at her for a long time. He was not a man who softened easily or quickly, and he did not soften now. But something in him acknowledged what she had said, and he nodded once and said, "You have your mother's certainty. It was her best quality and her most expensive one." "I know," Helena said. "I know where it comes from." He came inside. The campaign stopped. The debts were settled over the following weeks, quietly, without the visibility with which they had been called. And Julian's name began the slow work of recovering what it had lost. One season after that, the terrace at dusk, the orange trees in the courtyard going dark, the harbor lights beginning to appear one by one on the water below. Margaret was established in a small house on the far side of the harbor town, with a woman companion and a garden, and the first quiet months of a life that was entirely her own. Tobias had grown half an inch and had strong opinions about fishing, and had developed a habit of addressing his father with the easy familiarity of a boy who has decided the question of where his father belongs and moved on to more interesting matters. Julian lowered the lamp inside, and the door of the villa closed, and the terrace went dark. In the morning, the harbor below was blue and still, and the light came in from the east across the water and fell on the Malecon stones and on the doorstep of the villa where 3 pairs of boots stood beside the door, Tobias's small ones, and 2 larger pairs that had been there long enough to be unremarkable. Out in the harbor, a ship was coming into port, riding the morning tide, its sails catching the early light. Helena watched it from the upper window, the way it moved through the water, purposeful and unhurried, arriving rather than departing. She watched it come all the way in and tie up at the dock without once wanting to be on it. On the writing desk behind her, a letter to Sir Aldous lay half-finished. Not a defense, and not an accounting of what had happened, and not an argument about who had been wrong and when. An invitation. Tobias has found a fisherman named Sebastião who has promised to take him out past the harbor mouth on the morning tide. He would like his grandfather to come. He has asked me 3 times. I think you should come. She went back to the desk and picked up the pen and finished the letter. And the morning continued around her. The sound of Tobias on the stairs, the smell of bread from the kitchen, Julian's voice somewhere below answering a question she could not quite hear. She folded the letter and sealed it and set it by the door to be sent. And then she went downstairs to where her family was, and the day began.